Welcome to the RJLT Economics. In this podcast, I want to revisit the topic of China's bursting real estate bubble. And I want to do this because I'm seeing some evidence that perhaps a policy shift is imminent. Now, I want to develop today's podcast in 3 steps. First, I want to talk about the evidence that I'm seeing that perhaps is foreshadowing a shift in policy. Secondly, I want to explain why I believe this policy shift is rational. It's based on rational decisions, perfectly reasonable. And thirdly, I want to give a couple of areas where I think perhaps the Chinese government and people interested and engaged in Chinese economy will be looking at as the next engine of growth for, this big economy. First, the evidence. There is one major evidence, which is that now on Chinese social media, the discussion of the bursting of the real estate bubble is not only allowed, but perhaps even promoted. I'm seeing this type of comments, videos showing up on the front page of these social media platforms. That can only mean one thing, especially seeing that last year when I and perhaps many others tried to post similar contents, these contents could not pass even the content check, content verification, that this type of drafts would be rejected on the basis of controversial opinion. Right, something that basically essentially cannot be discussed. But now this is no longer controversial, but it's more consensus. And I see a very similar pattern just 3 actually, perhaps 3 months ago, very short 3 months ago, perhaps 3.5 months ago, from the end of November, you could see and hear there are a lot of quote-unquote experts came on state media, and a lot of the experts came on the state media and said that the virus not really a concern anymore, and a lot of the opinions posting average people, presumably average people, could be the part of the apparatus, but let's say the average people posting on social media, there were a lot of opinions that share the same view. And sure enough, after 1 month, we see a shift in policy. And now I'm seeing that similar pattern could be, this is a possibility, right? But it could be happening. We're now starting to see on social media a change in tone. We're not yet seeing a change in on state media. These experts coming out and say that the real estate bubble must be controlled. That must be deflated for the safety of the economy. It must be deflated in order to secure a common prosperity, which is something that is which is a key mission of the current administration. So I think there are still some questions whether this is really purely a grassroots movement. Not that a movement. Let's not use movement. Right, a grassroots opinion, which is that the bubble needs to be deflated safely. Or it's also the fact that it's being allowed indicates a shift or a preparation in shifting policy. I'm not entirely certain now, but once we see if we see some experts go on state media and start saying the same thing, we should be prepared for an imminent shift in policy. And this shift in policy would mean that real estate price, housing price in China would collapse half to 2/3 drop It's a precipitous drop, and I think that could be one thing. But of course, the reason that the government has yet come out with a similar opinion must be because they don't want to have this very precipitous drop. They have long wished for a controlled deflation on the real estate bubble. I have explained this previously. But now let's move on to step 2, why I think this could be a rational decision. Basically, there are 2 things. Number 1 is that this is inevitable. I mean, one way or another, the bubble needs to be deflated. Either it is being deflated voluntarily in a controlled manner, or it's involuntarily in an uncontrolled manner. And perhaps, in my opinion, a controlled manner is better. And then the question is whether you want it to be a long-winded, prolonged process, or you want it to be in a shortened process. In a prolonged process, judging from the size of the real estate bubble of China, if China does not wants to keep a relatively steady price and let inflation and productivity really reduce, improve the relative affordability of the housing and deflate the housing bubble in relative terms, that could take a decade, 2 decades, right? So that's going to be a long-winded one. But during these 2 decades, there's systemic risk on the financial system. And whether this is something that is wise, of course, if you can do it, right? If you are certain that in these 2 decades you have good control of the internal and external economic macro environment, then this will be the best way, the least painful way, a controlled deflation of a bubble. But if because there are so much risk in such a long period of time, and I think in China there is this idiom. Essentially, it says that long suffering is not as good as a quick one. Right? That's obvious. So you get a quick and sharp one. So the alternative is to have a rather painful period of a couple of years, quick job, that eventually, if the government is able. Now, this is also carries its own risks, because as we know, some generals from the United States have already declared that within 2 years there needs to be an armed conflict, right? And this means that the time that China has is very limited. So can China manage this in this period? That's really difficult. But if the Chinese government chooses to have this long period of deflation in housing prices in relative terms, not a deflation of monetary deflation, you know what I mean, then during these 2 decades, at any time, at any point, if there is a conflict, you can see, you will be certain that there is going to be a disaster that also includes a precipitous collapse of the housing market, the precipitous collapse of the financial system. So this is a systemic risk in a prolonged way or a shortened way. The task here is to have the housing price reduced to a more reasonable level very quickly before any armed conflict that may or may not take place. Hopefully it will never take place, because absolutely for certain, if you want to build wealth, if you want to enjoy prosperity, armed conflict is not the way to it. Now, some people in the United States have taken the wrong ideas. They think that the United States has been so successful. They think that, and seeing that America has been at war for almost its entire history, they think that America has been prosperous because America has been at war. I think that's really conflicting two things. I think the two things. In reality, I believe that America is so successful despite the fact that it has been at war for almost the entirety of its history. Of course, part of the military conflict simply because that America won, that they took the land, the resources from its neighbors, primarily the Mexicans, that America has these resources. But the fundamental source of America's prosperity lies in the fact that it has a vast wealth of natural resources. It has essentially everything, and it has a very arable arable land. Very good, very good land for farming. It has essentially everything that a modern society needs in terms of resources, and at the same time, it also has two oceans on its sides that protects it, so it has not been involved on its mainland in any major military conflict in the last century. Right, so that, I think, is the source of its prosperity. If America has not been at war for the last few decades everywhere, and if it has not built all these military bases, it could be even wealthier. That's my opinion, right? So a lot of people think otherwise. Oh, okay, I think now I'm rambling and digressing. So, all right, so that's my point is that it's not really irrational for the Chinese government to want a controlled but precipitous drop in real estate, in housing price. And the last point I want to talk about in today's podcast is where will be the next place to look at for growth in China. I think the Chinese government people probably have been looking at renewable energy, this sector. I think a lot has been bet on renewable energy. Whether this is going to be I want to say an industry that is actually going to be profitable, I have my doubts. I think the returns, the energy extracted per dollar invested is not really high. So that's one thing. So itself may not be an engine of growth, but that does not mean that renewable energy is something that we should not invest in. I think for a couple of reasons. One is for the environment. I do believe that the old ways of generating electricity, especially by burning fossil fuels, especially coal, is responsible for most of the pollution in China. Not just in electricity generation, but also in steel mills, in construction, where a lot of coal is burnt. That is really not good for the environment, and people's health really suffer. So I think in that sense, renewable energy, something that does not pollute as much, is necessary to improve as a direct improvement of the standard of living in China, right? So not necessarily making money, but it's good for people's lives, makes quality of life better. So that's one thing. And of course, another thing is energy security, because China is poor in natural resources, especially on a per capita term. So it is necessary to invest a lot in renewable energy, especially that which can be generated locally, sourced locally, whether it's solar, whether it's wind, whether it's tidal, whether it's hydro, whether it's nuclear, or whether it's fusion, something that that reduces China's reliance on foreign energy sources and reduce its the pollution. That's actually good. Whether it makes money or not, that's secondary. The point is that it is good for people's lives, and perhaps with the guidance of the government, this sector, I think, still can be in an area of growth, although it is already involved in high levels of competition. The level of competition is already very intense in that sector. So if you are an investor, perhaps not, but I think this could be an area of growth. A second area is perhaps biotech. That, again, it's because I'm not really I'm not maybe not the smartest person here, but I think biotech is something that China is investing a lot in, and this partly is because China has some issue with an aging population, and there is a need to it's mostly for healthcare, and people are betting big on healthcare, on biotech, and I think the virus situation of the last 3 years also I think played a role in helping people readjusting their views on this sector, and I think more attention will be paid to this sector. Of course, this has been the talk since before I was in college. And if you don't know, I did my undergraduate studies in biological sciences, which essentially is preparing for some biotech stuff. And so I think I have some understanding of this sector. But my view of it is not very optimistic, because I think the amount of investment in this sector needs to be very, very high. There is a lot of randomness in terms of results, and risks are high. I think there's a high level of risk. Doesn't matter, even if you follow the best practices, even if there is no more intent, even if there is, even if you don't even follow commercial interests and only the interest of public health, there are risks, and these risks cannot be fully explored or understood in a short period of time. Some substances, let's say, the effect of some substances can only be understood after decades of use, and this is the problem with biotech, because it takes so much. The entire cycle of research and development is so long. So I think there could be more emphasis in here, but I don't think this will really be an engine of growth. In any case, the time period of easy growth in China, first from manufacturing with cheap labor, low quality product, counterfeit products, I think that period is mostly over. There are still a lot of cheap products and counterfeit products in China, but the international competitiveness of these products have dropped. Secondly, the period for really easy money from real estate speculation, I think, is coming to an end, and we are seeing the end of it. I think people who don't sell now will be the back holders, and I think the next source of growth, where a lot of money can be made very quickly, may not be so evident, and it may not even exist. Perhaps from now on, it is essential, it is necessary. In fact, China can only do one thing, which is to become innovative. Whether the Chinese people can manage it in an efficient and effective way, remains to be seen. To be innovative, to produce high quality products that cannot be replicated elsewhere, that nevertheless are commercially competitive. That is the task. And for an economy the size of China, it is essential to have numerous industries that are equally or similarly successful in this manner for the Chinese economy to be really the most important, the biggest in the world. Otherwise, it will just be somewhat stagnant. So there are a lot of challenges ahead, and I think at this point we cannot and must not rely on the initiatives of the government. The government can try, and perhaps I think in some areas they can be helpful, but it is really upon the people to do it. And if the government can make it easy for the people to be innovative, to be creative, to be productive, and that will be good. All right, that's my opinion. Just to say that I have updated my own website, which contains mostly photos. So if you want to see it, it's at drjlt.com. Of course, you can follow me on social media as well. Links will be in the footer of drjlt.com. Thank you very much, and have a great day.